All right, here we are again. I thought a good topic of today will be a little bit different than what I've been talking about recently, which have been mainly either mailers or cardback variations or MOCs or whatever. What I'm going to talk about today is more of the literature around collecting, the literature around Kenner, of course, and the literature around everything that's involved or has been involved in the making of a lot of these toys that we so fondly collect and cherish and look at and relive these fond memories of childhood, so on and so forth. So I'm going to kind of go over some of my collection of the literature that's out there, and we'll go over the different aspects, because as collectors, we always collect in many different ways. You know, some people just collect figures, some people collect figures and playsets and vehicles, some people collect catalogs, So there's a wide variety of ways of sort of cherishing the Star Wars universe. And so now I would say a lot of people, start off with, the basic toys themselves. And of course, the most basic toy that we have come to love, of course, are the figures. Now, some will argue with me on this point, but I think the one book that a lot of us have grown to love over the years, despite it continuing to be outdated, is sort of the Kellerman book. Now, what I have here is sort of the original box that the Kellerman book came in. So here is, of course, the infamous only one that was supposedly produced. I know there was a version 2 that was in the works that never made it to press. Of course, there are many people looking and working on the version 2, which is the Facebook group, and there's many people involved in that. But this is considered by many as an invaluable research or an invaluable source of information, not necessarily up-to-date information, but it does give a lot of history about a multitude of topics, whether it's just going over the loose figures and their SKU numbers or where they came in the sequence of things, comparing what is found or what was thought to be found at that time in terms of cardback combinations, so on and so forth. I mean, there is a plethora of information in these books. Not only just the pictures, the picture quality in this book is outstanding, but the information is even more outstanding, and it covers everything from displays to mailers to foreign cards to prototype cardbacks, so on and so forth. So it is a very good book to have. Even if you just sit around and read it for 10 minutes, you will always find new pieces of information that you had not had or had not known before, at least. And maybe I'm just a shallow thinker, but I always pick this up and always learn something new every time I do. What's special about this particular book itself is, of course, it's the John Kellerman signature on this one. I actually have another one that's, at least to me, is a little bit more special, and the reason why is because this one actually has the May the Force Be With You from John Kellerman. I always thought that was an interesting addition to it. Now, the copyright of this, of course, is in 2003, but still, I think a very, 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 very valuable book, especially for people that are you may just collect figures, but you want to know information about multi-packs or information about displays or like I said, foreign cards, whatever it may be. A lot of that information is in here. Now, of course, in the day and age of the internet, you can, Google everything and probably find out the majority of information that's contained in these, but that's an exhaustive set of searches. This book is a great coffee table or bookshelf book just to pick up and just look at. I mean, it's visually stunning. The information is even better. Okay. But, and those can be sometimes more difficult to find. There are some other books out there that carry I would say, more basic information about the figures themselves, not necessarily details about the packaging or variations. But this is a book, Belomo. This is just going over all of the figures themselves in detail, and there's a lot of background information about the figures, how they're involved in the stories, different weapons they came with, what years they were released, under what card back. They even have the Ewok line. There's play sets, accessories, all sorts of things in this book. This is also a very handy book just to, nowadays, as there's a lot of us that have to stay home and needs, let's say some downtime. This is a good book just to get basic information about Star Wars figures, and it says 77 through 85, which is very good. Of course, one of the, I don't want to say personalities, but one of the celebrities in Star Wars collecting, of course, is Mr. Sansweet. This was his book, which is the Ultimate Collection. Now, this book contains not just 77 to 85, but some of the more recent versions and or let's say figures that were put out. I mean, this has got a plethora of information, and it tells us sort of where their figures were released, when they were released, and so there's a lot of good information here, at least for those people that like information on loose figures or figure variants, basic variants, not the picky idiosyncratic things that a lot of us like to try to find. But anyways, this is an excellent source of information. I'm trying to think, I can't remember when this one came out. This was 2012, so obviously a very recent book that had been released. And believe it or not, another source of information that has kind of come to the surface over the last few years has actually been the auction catalogs. The Prop Store's first toy auction catalog, when it came out, it actually includes a wealth of information, just basic information, but information nonetheless, about figures and collecting and different background information on some of the pieces that they were selling at the time or auctioning off at the time. And so even just looking at these, you can get a sense on collectibles, obviously way outside Star Wars as well, but it is something that's very handy and very useful just to get some basic information on. Now, while not in quite as much detail, but even the Hakes catalog has information about some Star Wars collecting stuff, mainly the history or a very brief history of some of the items that they were auctioning off. But again, if you're sitting around and you have, let's say, 10 minutes to burn and you want some entertainment, these books can be handy just to peruse, if nothing else, just to look at the pictures to see what's out there. Not everybody is stooped in the knowledge of all of the things that are out there in the Star Wars world. So that's a source you can consider. Now, back in the day, we once lived in a time in the 90s, especially, of price guides. We love price guides because not only would they give us a sense on value, but they'd also give us an idea about what's out there. And so one of the most, I think, well-known price guide / catalogs that have been put out there is, of course, Tomart's Guide. And so version 1 of Tomart's, of course, it's Sansweet again, and then Tumbush, or however you want to pronounce his name. But this was an excellent source of information, not just for the value, but just to get a sense on what are the other collectibles in the Star Wars universe that are out there. And I mean, from t-shirts to, you name it, whatever. Now, the downside about these is, at least the first version, there was very few color. It was all, mostly black and white. The information is pretty compact. But again, it gives you a wealth of knowledge of the merchandise that was available with any kind of Star Wars logo or any kind of connection to merchandising of the movie, and of course anything to do with the Star Wars universe. Again, displays, soap and shampoo bottles, and then of course it does go through all of the figures, the MOCs, and so on and so forth. So this is a fantastic trip down memory lane that's, often entertaining. Now, this was put out, I think, 94-ish. Now, what followed suit was sort of the expanded edition, the second edition of Tomart's Guide. And there's several features about this one. Comes in, you can get it in a hard case. But the nice thing about this one, beyond the hardcover version, is that there's a lot more color photographs that are included. And so you can see many different items in full color, great layouts. You can also compare them to the prices that were in 94 with the ones that are now in 97. It's always an interesting trip. Almost makes you feel bad. But what I think the crown jewel of this particular one is what's included in the back. And what's included in the back is the unproduced classic Star Wars gallery or toy gallery. This is a wonderful section if you've ever wanted to know about let's say, figures that weren't produced, some of the different phases of the rocket firing FET prototypes, some of the, cape variations, unproduced Ewok lines, you name it, it's all collected, and guess what? In color. And so this is a fantastic source for some of that information. One of the things that it does have also is a lot of these prototype or mock-up card backs for the different logo styles that were potentially going to be produced. David DeMarcus showed us some in his own collection, which is incredible. But anyway, so this book kind of covers some of those ideas and card backs that were out there. Now, a more thorough examination of the card back process is in Mateus's book, A New Proof. Now, for those of you out there, and I'm very much included in that group, this goes over sort of the production sort of steps in making card backs, from the design to the proofs to, different people involved with it. I mean, if you ever could, this is a great book. I mean, again, stooped in history, thick of information about stuff that you're not going to come across on the internet too often. So I highly recommend this book. There's supposed to be the second version, which is the Empire one. At some point in time, I can't wait to get my hands on that one and read it. But this really makes you feel very involved in the process of what they went through in the design of the card backs, which I think is very good. Now, of course, when Kenner, they would design their products, they would get everything sort of in line, their prototypes would go through, get approved, and then they had to present them. Now, of course, the big show of the year, typically, I think people think of it basically the New York Toy Fair, and so of course Kenner had to produce catalogs of information with regard to what their toy lines were going to be and what was going to be available in the coming time. So of course these are sort of like the pre-Toy Fair catalogs. They have a wealth of photography and information. They also can go over different display types. This happens to be the 79 one. To me, this is the quintessential one for the FET offer, because at the Toy Fair, they had basically to change everything because it was at that time, well, they had decided months earlier, but they had originally set up their displays to highlight the rocket firing feature, and then of course that all changed, so that's always interesting to see. And of course in these catalogs they also have the other products that Kenner was putting out there, and some of these things you might not have thought of in many years. And so when you see it, like of course Milky, the Marvelous Milking Cow, anyways, very entertaining. And again, wealth of information about what Kenner was going to put out in late 79. Also, this is just another example. This is the 80 version of it. So, of course, when you talk about 80, you talk about Empire Strikes Back. And so they have all the new figures that were going to be released, along with a lot of the figures and play sets and stuff like that. And in this one, there was one particular thing I wanted to find. Of course, Strawberry Shortcake. Can't miss that. The Switcheroos. This is for Steve. Of course, the Alien stuff. Right over there. Anyways, you have the, precursors to Indiana Jones, which are Butch Cassidy and Company, the Real West, all kinds of stuff. So anyway, these are awesome to look at. Again, they're time capsules in book form and can really bring you back and kind of put a smile on your face. Well, Kenner also had a special program that was called the Department Store Program. And it was through the major big box retailers where they would release special items for those only, not available in the general public, but only through the big department stores. And so those catalogs are ones that I've been hunting for many years, which are the department store programs. Of note in the department store programs, of course, for me was the 3-packs. And so here is, the page, and this is in 1980. And so when you look at this, it tells you what's included, sort of base price, what the measurements are. And so this was a very awesome piece of information that came out. And oftentimes what you would see is a lot of these photographs of the items were either pre-production items or ones without bubbles. This was a mock-up. The color scheme. So, for example, the color scheme on the Android set was much different. It was green instead of blue, and so there's a lot of other little details in here that you can pick out that kind of give you that sense of, hey, I found out something new that I didn't know before. So that's always good to look at. Now, of course, the photographs that are used in these books, someone's got to take them, obviously. Well, I think all of us know Kim Simmons, who's active in the groups, mostly about Star Wars, but sometimes not about Star Wars. But they just recently released this book, which is The Man Who Shot Luke Skywalker. And the fantastic thing about this book are just the photographs from all of the stuff that was produced and some that was not produced. But it's interesting to see all the photography that was involved in promoting the toys that, of course, we all know and love. And so this book is, again, visually spectacular, but again, even more so is the information, just sort of a lot of the background material that comes with it. And so, again, if you're ever trying to learn about, the origins of the photography or what went into the photography, this is always a very good book to get. Supposedly there's going to be also a version or a second edition on that. Now, one of the other interests I have is actually the advertisements that went out into the newspapers, comic books, whatever media was out there. And there is a series of books by Phillip Reed. This particular one is A Galaxy of Action Figure Savings, which is kind of an interesting title, but I love it. But it's looking at newspaper clippings and other types of advertisements. Basically these books are filled with newspaper clippings of the ads that were put out by different retailers. And once again, this is an incredible book of information just from a historical point of view. And so if you've ever wondered sort of where the prices came from, what they were during a certain year, what was put out in the comic books and or your local newspaper, check these books out. These are fantastic. And again, Phillip Reed, you can get these on Amazon. Now, Tomart, Action Figure Digest was a series of, was a magazine that was put out. But in the mid-2000s, 2006, I think, the Tomarts put out what's called the Kenner Legacy, which was a 6-part series on basically how Kenner began and the different iterations of the company, what they produced, the stories behind some of the more headlining things that happened, the rocket firing fiasco and things like that. So there's a series, like I said, 6 parts. And the first one is how it began. And then, of course, there are the other 5 ones that are in a pack. These things, again, loaded with information about the history of Kenner, the people involved, what they went through, and the different designs, production problems, whatever it may be. The series of soft cover books are fascinating. Of course, then they go into all the other Kenner lines, including the ones from the 40s and 50s and 60s. Shane, hey, there's Million Dollar Man. Then, of course, you get into the Star Wars stories. The second book, part 2, is really the most important book, because it talks about Kenner getting the license and then going through their production problems, then also going through the rocket firing FET. And then the last book, part 6, talks about a lot of the proofs, unproduced stuff. Again, great information. If you ever want to learn about the history of Kenner, highly suggest these. Now, of course, recently, if you ever wanted to know a little bit of history that was going on in the company itself, meaning the behind the scenes, the faces that were involved in the engineering, the production, the marketing, all of those aspects. This book, Engineering an Empire, is a great read. If nothing else, it kind of gives you a sense of being closer to the action, kind of knowing all these little nuances that were going on behind the scenes. And it's just a great history book. So again, if you have time, unfortunately, if you're forced to stay home, getting a copy of this book is a wonderful thing to have. Obviously, the guys involved in this were, how would I put it, very enthusiastic about this, and that was warranted, because it is an excellent book. It's got lots of photographs, pictures of internal memos, prototype figures. I mean, you name it, it's there. Again, wonderful book. And then, so that's really kind of mostly about all the U.S. stuff. Now, I don't get too much into, let's say, the Meccano, the Harberts, and all that other stuff, but I will plug one book about the foreign market, and that is this book, the Tri-LIGO Handbook. This thing is also very outstanding, very short and sweet, but the way that it's organized is exceptionally intuitive. They talk about, cost and rarity, how difficult it is to find it in different countries. And so it's a great book. There's not a lot of verbiage in it, but again, to see some of the pictures or some of these foreign cards is amazing, because obviously this may be sometimes the only source to see those pictures. And so, again, if you're sitting around, this is a great book. It's a handbook, I mean, literally. So I think it's an awesome thing to look at and get. And again, accessible you can get it on Amazon. All right, so that's kind of my little tour through a lot of the literature and different books that you can get on really kind of most aspects of the collecting world. Now, the one book that has not been produced, and I will encourage someone to put this together at some point in time, is actually a book on the collectors, because they, in and of themselves, are an interesting piece of this, especially all the people involved in the early days of the group chats, even well before Rebel Scum. That kind of history into how all these people got together and really, were instrumental in driving the collectors and sort of creating this massive world of collectors that would never have happened unless it had been to those guys, whether it's the Salvatores, whether it's the Lopez's, whomever you want to include in that. But I think that would be a very interesting book, just to hear the stories, just to hear sort of what the dark times were like before Rebel Scum, and certainly before Facebook, and even the ability to do these kinds of informative videos. So anyways, so that's my spiel today. As I always say, stay safe, do what you need to do, and hopefully we'll see you guys on the other side. Hopefully it's Celebration. All right, take it easy.